Walking without skin. Managing adversity with vulnerability.
Pain is wrong, every inch of my heart like an open wound. I can't go on, I'll drown if I don't stop the bleeding soon.
My father, who I adored, shot and killed my mother, who really was my best friend, and then within a month moved in with my aunt, my mother's sister, and then married her. And that one gunshot kind of blew my world apart, and I lost my whole family.
Where can I find some protection to prevent this ongoing infection?
You are listening to Walking Without Skin, the show where we encourage our guests to be vulnerable, to share their voices with authenticity, to tell their stories from the heart. We will talk about hope and recovery, about overcoming loss, changes, challenges, and adversities. We will walk without skin.
How will I know when it's safer? When every step feels like sandpaper. I'm walking without skin. I'm walking without skin.
And here is your host, Lois Wagner.
Hi, I am Lois, your friend for forgiveness and the creator of Walking Without Skin. I have a book with the same title, Walking Without Skin. And today I have a dynamic guest, Brenda Edelman. Hi, Brenda.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great. It's so lovely to see you again. We've had lots of interaction over the years.
Yes, it's so lovely to see you again, have this conversation with you.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Brenda is an award-winning actor with a one-woman show based on her life story, and she's performed this in 4 countries and 10 states in the United States. She's a digital course creator, speaker, and coach, and is the recipient of the Hero of Forgiveness Award from the Hawaii International Forgiveness Project. Her book is titled, My Father Killed My Mother and Married My Aunt, Forgiving the Unforgivable. Sure. That's quite a story that you've got there, and it resonates so much with me because I also believe in forgiving the unforgivable. But before we get into your work, Brenda, what do you understand by the term walking without skin?
Walking without skin, to me, means that you're completely exposed and tender, since I feel like skin protects us.
Great, thank you. Well, let's tell our listeners a little bit about your story, where it began and how it began.
The story having to do with my big loss that the forgiving the unforgivable.
Definitely.
Because boy, there's a lot of stories in there, but yeah, okay, well, and of course you know me, so I have to forget like you know me. I was so close with my mother and my father. I was codependently close with them. They had a harsh, passionate love-hate relationship when I was growing up. When I moved from New York to California, I saw them 6 different times within 9 months, always trying to fix their problems, be happy, help them be happy, because I loved them so much. Like I said, I was close with both of them. And then in 1995, my father, who I adored, shot and killed my mother, who really was my best friend. And then within a month moved in with my aunt, my mother's sister, and then married her. And, that one gunshot kind of blew my world apart, and I lost my whole family in that night. My brother and I were half brother and sister, and it was my father who killed our mother. And immediately he knew that he had done it. There were 8 hours before the police were called. There was a lawyer in place. His lawyer told my father not to talk to anyone, but my father did talk to my brother and I, and was kind of claiming it was an accident, but it wasn't an accident. His gun was gone. There was a cleanup. He had a mob lawyer. And they had this volatile relationship that he had pulled a gun on my mother in the past. And as someone who loved both of them, when they split up and then got back together, I thought my mother must have been lying, because why would she go back to someone who put a gun to her head? I didn't understand her fears. I didn't understand the dynamics. And my brother and I, anyway, my brother knew that it had been thought about before. My father did go to prison for only 2 years on a 5-year sentence, because it was domestic violence, I suppose. And my brother agreed to the plea bargain because my father's gun, the gun I learned to shoot on growing up in Brooklyn, disappeared. And so he had thought maybe with a trial without the evidence that the DA said, maybe my father wouldn't get any time. So my brother agreed to the plea bargain. Anyway, my brother and I have since reconciled. After my father went to prison, I got a master's degree in spiritual psychology. So I went through years of deep loneliness, deep depression, just afraid to be close to anyone, not trusting anyone, especially myself, and because I trusted my father. And then I went to school and got a master's in spiritual psychology. And in that program, I learned why I was having such a hard time going on, or why, like, I wanted to forgive my father. Everyone says forgive, but I would forgive him and then I would hate him. And then I would hate myself for ever trusting him, like it was a loop. But I learned how to actually forgive in that program. And it's what I teach a lot of clients. I was focused on coaching about forgiveness for about 10 years. Now I teach on storytelling mostly and healing from story. But when I learned about setting healthy boundaries in that program, which was so important, I realized why I couldn't truly forgive, because I was walking without skin. I would still talk to my father, and, he could still be doing the same thing. And I try to forgive and I just be angry. And then when I learned about healthy boundaries and he got out of prison, I ended up taking him to court for wrongful death with my brother. So my brother and I reconciled with that. And I used all the tools I learned to forgive my father, also to forgive my brother for what I felt like he abandoned me, which I'm sure he felt like I abandoned him. And I actually took my dad to court from a place of self-honor and self-love versus punishment. And that was where I did a lot of self-forgiveness. And so that's been my work. Underneath everything that I do is always healing, forgiveness, and how forgiveness is for us. And yet I know you also had situations with court and stuff like that. I forgave my father, and I also took him to court for wrongful death, because that's what I needed to do, so.
You've turned your story into a play. Tell us about your play.
Yes, quite interesting. That was another whole layer of my healing. So I actually started my one-woman show based on my life story right before I started that master's program. And because I'm an actress, and at the time I never ever planned to put my story on stage. But I also, like I mentioned, I was so devastatingly depressed and isolated, and I would act behind the writing of others and, and characters. And I felt so stifled, like I couldn't speak my truth. And so there was a storytelling exercise in this top acting class in LA. I never thought it would go beyond, I'm telling my real story in a class. It was a class of 100 people, but I just knew I had to get it out of me. Didn't think it would be a show, because I was so filled with shame and doubt and guilt and all this other stuff I hadn't worked on yet. And I did it. I did a short piece, and I got a standing ovation. A director wanted to work with me. Then a theater company wanted, it was like a snowball effect. And so in the piece, I explored the different characters of my life, and I got to play my father. And in playing him, I got to get out of the black and white thinking of everything. And because an actor doesn't play someone or a character they're playing as evil, I had to look at him as a full character to see not to change history, but to say, okay, this was a man who had some mental illness. This was a man who, was trying to, he wasn't like, I'm going to murder you. He was like, what is the complexity of that happens where you can murder your wife? So I had to look at it, and it was actually very healing for me to just do, part one of my forgiveness process is a healthy release of anger. So it's not ever about stuffing it. It's about looking at it. So I ended up putting the show on stage, and then I had a first run in Los Angeles. People loved it. People laughed, people cried, and then I would go home and be absolutely miserable. And that's when I took complete time off from presenting my show on stage. And I did the inner work so that I could heal, took my dad's course for wrongful death, and then came back strong with the show. And I've now done it all over for different communities, domestic violence coalitions, women prisoners, the US military, youth at risk, theaters. And when the world was open, it was so amazing because I'd also do forgiveness workshops and also get to just talk to people afterwards. And there was so much healing that took place in the audience, because the way I do my story is very creative. I'm not preaching. It's not even like a talk. I'm just saying, this is my story. And then I do it through different characters and stuff like that.
Do give us a little snippet of one of your characters.
Well, I like playing my father. He's one of the funniest characters around. And he's not even a caricature, because he really is like New York in like the 1980s. You know what I'm saying?
It's fabulous. I wish I could see your play.
You can, if you contact me. I have, the theater that it was just produced actually virtually by a couple of theaters in San Diego and LA. And so they let tickets up for sale sometimes. So you could potentially get a ticket to see it, and it'd be delivered to you. It was a 3-camera shoot.
Oh, fantastic. I'll certainly look out for that.
Cool.
You said your father married your aunt. When did that happen? Before you went to prison? After you went to prison? How did that work?
Yeah, it's really not clear. Another thing I had to learn to forgive and let go of, really the cornerstone of my teaching is that sometimes we just don't have answers. So we have to be okay with not knowing them. As best as I can guess, because believe it or not, the person who did the research on this for me was a person who did an article on me and what happened. It was someone, I think it was in England, actually. I think it was an English company. They were doing an article on me. They found my work on the internet. And I said, I don't know when they got married. And they did some research, and they said it seemed like it was sometime, he formally got married sometime while he was in prison. So he didn't go to prison for a full year. He moved in with my aunt. And then he went to prison on a plea bargain a year later. And sometime in the time he was in prison, he got married to her.
And your relationship with him and your aunt today?
Peachy. No. My father died in 2004, or so we think. That's another thing. It's why because I've worked with so many clients who are like, well, if this person who cheated on me, my husband cheated on me, if he would just take responsibility, then I could move on into the future. And it's like, this is your future. Sometimes you don't get the answers. And is that answer really going to help you? Maybe, be nice. But if you ever given your power over to someone else for your happiness, you're screwed. So he died and I do talk about, I act kind of this stuff out. It's actually quite poignant in my show when I got the letter that told me that he had died, because I had done a lot of healing, but yet who knew that there was another layer? Like, I guess that my inner child was still like, someday my father's going to take responsibility and I'm going to, we're going to be father and daughter again. And then when he died, it was actually quite freeing. After the initial shock, I was like, okay, now I can stop having that young part of me, still be hopeful. He died in 2004, just got a letter in the mail saying that he had a heart attack, but it was a month after he had died. And so at the time, or supposedly died, I think he did die. At the time, we had just transferred our legal case from New York to Florida. So we were closer to collecting the $2 million judgment that we had won in wrongful death. And so when we got the letter that he died, several people thought it was a fake. I do believe it was real. And then my aunt died maybe 4 years ago, something like that. She skipped town because we had won that big judgment, and nobody on this side of the family, like nobody knew where she was. But I had a huge healing again around her. I teach my clients to not just compartmentalize, not to just say, oh, it doesn't matter. And I did it with her, and then when she died, I remember my aunt, who I'm close with, my mother's other sister, telling me, and I was so flippant, and I was like, whatever. And then I had this incredible, I was in the car driving from a conference in LA to San Diego, and I had this incredible experience where my mom came to me from the other side and was just like showing me that she was welcoming her sister to the other side, just welcoming her like with love. And I had this moment of, oh my God, I've still been carrying this anger toward my aunt for freaking 20 years. What have I been doing? And so it was incredibly healing, and I just was sobbing. So that was that.
Sure, it's quite a story. Tell us about the forgiveness.
That is a broad question. Well, I'll tell you what my 3 steps are. Okay, because I do have my book. I also have a program called that's what I can invite people to if they'd like, or they can get more information. I have a digital program called Phoenix Rising, and that's a 30-day journey into and through forgiveness to freedom. And so first I wrote the book, which has my 3-step process in it, which I'll talk about in 1 second. And then I created this program. It was literally downloaded to me about 2 years or so ago. And it is everything, pretty much everything I did, the main things that I did to be able to forgive and come back into my power, to find love again, to find creativity, to become successful, to stay grounded, to care for myself. That's Phoenix Rising. So the program, the 3 steps. First step is moving out of denial and into acceptance of what is. Specifically, I know some people just are like always in the past. That's not what this is about. It's about moving out of denial, because for me, I was so trying to believe my father didn't do this, and listening to the lies. And a lot of people do this, even like in relationships, or it's someone they know is on drugs and they're like, oh no, I'm not doing it. It's like really looking at the situation. Is someone cheating on you? Really look at the situation, not what we want the situation to be. So it's moving out of denial and into acceptance of what is. And actually in this first stage, and I've done a lot of workshops on this too, so it really is proven, it's actually embracing that you're a victim, because we try so hard to not be a victim that our victim mentality, kind of ends up being in the present with other relationships. So you actually have to let yourself be a victim. That was so fucking awful. I can't believe it. They're so horrible. But you have to get it out, because otherwise in those times when we're alone, we feel like a victim and we're disempowered. But you do it in a healthy way. So I have exercises to do it in a healthy way where you're not hurting anyone else or hurting yourself. Obviously, people can go to therapy. Several of my clients, they'll go to therapy and also work with me or work on these things. I learned this in my master's in spiritual psychology, what I teach. And I didn't need a therapist for that, but I was in the container of that program. And then so you're doing that, you're embracing the victim instead of saying, no, I won't be a victim. So that the second step is giving up your need to be right. So you've gotten it out fully so you can move on instead of having it leak out in other areas. And the kind of exercises I teach in that is letting go of judgment. And there's very specific ways to do that. It's so that your heart is open and you can start trusting mostly yourself. And then step 3, not everybody gets to it, but people get to it at different times, would be finding the lessons so that you can move on and you can help people with what you've learned, like what you're doing with the resilience of how you could go through so much and get to the other side and still make a life for yourself and still be able to trust again, still take chances again, things like that. And in that stage, some of the exercises to help people get out of their own, like that loop in our head of how bad things were or why did someone do this, would be volunteer work and things like that, helping people or pets or animals that, have it worse, because someone unfortunately always has it worse than we do too.
If you could have a billboard on the side of the road, what would you have on your billboard?
I think I really, what always comes forward to me is Shakespeare, "This above all else, to thine own self be true."
Okay.
That's been something that has really rang true for me. I have it in my one-woman show, and I felt like Shakespeare. So my one-woman show was called My Brooklyn Hamlet, because in Hamlet, it's similar. His father was killed by his uncle, and his uncle marries his mother. And I actually found solace in that character when I was going through my darkest days, because I felt like nobody could relate to me. And so in my show, I was able to, like in my very New York story, incorporate some monologues from Hamlet for when the emotions are too much, and certainly for when like maybe someone would sing because the emotions are so much, but people would run out of the theater if I was singing. So I have monologues, but I studied Shakespeare in London and New York, and my mother read it to me from the time I was a little girl. So yeah, I would say that's it. And that's really at the end of my show too. "This above all else, to thine own self be true."
Perfect. What would you say to somebody who is in the early phases of their trauma, whatever that trauma is? What advice would you give them?
Be kind to yourself, love yourself, be open to healing, but you don't have to rush to fit into what anybody else thinks. But be open to know that it can get better, and just love yourself so much. Self-forgiveness, right? We often blame ourselves. Like I talk about self-forgiveness was so important for me, and people are like, why do you have to forgive yourself when your father did this? For me, it was because I felt like I should have somehow saved my mother, or I shouldn't have trusted my father, when of course doing the inner work is like, of course I trust my father. I was taught to trust my father, and I loved him.
Share a little bit about your storytelling workshops and what you do.
Oh my God, I'm glad you asked. They're so amazing. I know we've worked a little bit together on your story. For the past, like, it was before COVID, I started, like, I was already teaching storytelling because I have this successful one-person show, and people would be like, calling me up and be like, can I take you to dinner? Can I take you to lunch? And then they would just, ask me so many questions. And there were a lot of questions that were similar. And so I started teaching storytelling way back, probably a little bit back in like 2012, 2013, or I do like one-off coaching sessions. And then I created my digital course because I wanted to reach people everywhere. And then right before COVID, probably like, maybe it was a year before COVID, I started teaching. Well, that was the 8-week Take the Stage experience. And I started teaching people my method, which has to do with finding the best story, but then also really connecting emotionally, not hiding the emotion, not giving too much emotion. Like all the mistakes I made over the years is how I teach, but healing is really pivotal to what I feel storytelling can be a vehicle for the person doing it and also for the audience. So for the past 2 years or so, though, I've been now doing a Healing Through Story Tell Yours on stage, a workshop very regularly. I mean, I've helped develop and direct like 100, 150 probably at this point, 135 people doing short TED style talks or one-person shows. And they're wonderful. And so that I first started doing them in San Diego live, and now they've been virtual for the last couple of years. And then I what's so great is I get to produce showcases. Like before that, I was teaching some in-person classes, but I wasn't doing a showcase. And now virtually, it's so easy. And in person in San Diego was pretty easy, but I saw the impact of the audience. So now I love giving a showcase. So the next Healing Through Story Tell Yours class, I just finished 2, is going to be in 2022.
Are you able to share a snippet from somebody's story that maybe changed the way you see the world or the way you operate?
I think I always have director and developer hat on when I'm working with people's stories. I would say the biggest thing other people's stories do for me, and they do it all the time, they break my heart. Like, seriously, I get to hear all these stories, I guess, because my story is so big. I get people who have been through so much, and my job is to like know what they've been through, but then direct it and bring the best out of the person while they're healing. I would say what happens for me, because there's everything from, you know, sexual abuse of children to there's so much, and suicides in the family, and like there's so much that people go through. I would say what happens for me is I get inspired by the human spirit. It's not so much I'm taught something specific because I'm in the space of holding for people, but it's more like I have a renewed faith in human spirit and how strong people are, because the things people go through, and then how loving they are, and how like they're so committed to their healing, and they're so creative, and they're so courageous. Like, that's been so incredible, especially during lockdown and stuff, to be in my classes with people who are so brave. Like, it makes me more brave. I guess that's what it is. It makes me more brave.
That brings me to my next question, which, as you know, I've got a program called Brave. It's designed to eliminate, eradicate, reduce toxic masculinity, bullying, harassment, all of those things. What does the word brave mean to you?
I feel like brave and courageous, I was going to say they're synonymous, but in a way, I think brave is like, someone can be courageous, but I think brave is like facing something head on. You know, like we find times in our life where we have to be courageous, but it's almost like brave is you're taking a stand and you're going to be the one who leads, you know, something like that.
Perfect. Going back to your storytelling workshops and your helping people get their voices out there, what do you think is the greatest benefit for individuals who do get on stage and share their story?
Oh yeah, and I do want to mention one other thing is that, like, I do those classes live, but I also have digital programs. So I have 2 storytelling digital programs, well, 2 main ones. One is Your Story Made Simple. It's really your story for impact. That's not necessarily a stage program. That one is for entrepreneurs. So half of my clients are performers and half are entrepreneurs. And that one is for storytelling and marketing. And so there is one module is just on healing from story. So, and then the other program is Create, Promote, and Profit with a One-Person Show for speakers and performers. And that one's specifically for stage. But Your Story Made Simple has really deep level of healing in it. So I feel like telling your story for these entrepreneurs and stuff, and people who would normally be behind the scenes, like, you don't have to be on a formal stage to have the impact. You don't have to be on a formal stage in person to be able to heal yourself, not the way that I teach. So I feel like, however, so they're putting their story in their marketing, they're putting it on their web pages, and really what that one's so important for is being able to tell your story on video, tell your story in summits, tell your story in a podcast in a way that people will remember you. Like, people will remember what I said, but it's getting so clear on what your story is and the message behind it, so that you're making the world a better place. Like, you're growing your business and you're making the world a better place. Because I kind of feel like if I'm growing my business, I can reach with my story, and including my story in it, I can have more of a reach than if I'm just in my circle. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's so important for entrepreneurs anyway, to just put that story in. You never know who you're going to heal and help, because you've been brave enough to tell your story in a powerful way that's not, too much or not sharing enough.
So people can reach out to you. How and where can they find you?
They can find me on Facebook. I have I'm really excited, actually, because I have my free Facebook group that's that is rocking right now. A community of really amazing people who have, they want to help people. They want to tell their story to help people and grow their business. And that is booked and paid, impactful storytellers. But obviously, Brenda Edelman on Facebook, I can direct people to that as well. I think in my header right now, though, I say the name of that. And of course, I have, free gifts, free opt-ins, things like that, challenges sometimes as well.
I've seen many of them. You do great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Brenda, what is one last piece of advice you can give to our listeners?
Start with self-forgiveness. Love yourself more than you ever thought possible. Love yourself. One of the things that really helped me was being the parent to myself that I so wanted in my mother and father. So whatever that looks like for you, be kind. When you find yourself challenged, think of it, or like something didn't work out and you feel like, why didn't it work out? What did I do wrong? Like or that person wasn't trustworthy. Use that as an opportunity to love yourself instead of beating yourself up. That will transform your world.
And a tip for forgiveness?
Well, I would say if you do that I would say right along the line with that, go one step further and really do inner child work. So you could literally have a stuffed animal or a picture of you at an age stage that was particularly hard for you. And just every day, pull that picture up consciously, see if that part of you wants to say anything, and just tell that part of you as you at this age stage how much you love her or him and how valuable they are. And I always say with that one, sometimes your inner child's like, why are you doing this? If that's the case, bring in your higher self so that you at this age stage, it's not ever about beating ourselves up. That higher self, it's your higher self and not your ego, because it's there saying, I love you, I hear you. That's all you have to say. That part of us just wants to be heard.
That's wonderful. Starts with self-love completely. If we can get that right, we can get anything else right. So, guys, do reach out to Brenda and join her storytelling, one of her storytelling groups.
They're wonderful.
It really is a fantastic experience. I did one and it was really eye-opening, stimulating, inspiring, really, really worth working with Brenda. So do reach out to her.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd like everyone to reach out to me on walkingwithoutskin.com. I can provide you with a free coaching session to find where you are in your healing journey, where you need to go to next. And I invite you all to join me and to fly free.
Thank you for listening to Walking Without Skin. We would love your feedback, opinions, suggestions, and ratings. Please share this podcast far and wide to encourage more people to share their stories with vulnerability and authenticity.